Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. This is the first in a series of public workshops that we have planned on implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act within the Modesto Subbasin. The purpose of today's workshop is to inform interested members of the public on SGMA, how the local agencies within the subbasin are complying with the law, and how you can get involved in this planning effort over the course of the next 18 months if you aren't involved already. Next slide, please. The agenda for today's discussion is to introduce you to your presenters for the workshop, detail how the webinar will function, give you an overview of SGMA, along with how it's being implemented in the Modesto Subbasin. Where are we in this process? What are the next steps? What the next steps will be? And then lastly, as I mentioned before, how you can get involved in this critically important activity. So with that as an outline for today's workshop, let's begin with introductions. My name is John Davids. I'm the chairman of the Stanislaus and Tuolumne Rivers Groundwater Basin Association, and I also manage the water resources for Modesto Irrigation District. We have a few presenters for you today, each of whom are familiar faces within the Modesto Subbasin, and they will each cover a different part of the presentation. Eric Thorburn is the Water Operations Manager and District Engineer with Oakdale Irrigation District. Walter Ward is the Water Resources Manager with Stanislaus County, and Phyllis Stannon is Vice President and Principal Geologist with Todd Groundwater. Also interspersed in our discussion today will be a few question and answer sections that will be facilitated by Kirsten Pringle with Stantec. Also on the webinar, we have representatives from the other member agencies for the Stanislaus and Tuolumne Rivers Groundwater Basin Association and Kim McFarland with the Tuolumne County GSA. Finally, I'd like to recognize two MID directors that I think are with us today, Director Larry Bird and Director Stu Gilman, and then also Supervisor Withrow. Thank you all for joining us today. Kirsten, could you please give us a few details on how the rest of the webinar will function?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you again for attending our webinar. As John mentioned, my name is Kirsten Pringle. I work for Stantec, and I've been hired to help support public outreach engagement for SGMA implementation in the Modesto Subbasin. I'm also going to help kind of be the back-ends organizer during the webinar. So anytime if you're having issues, either with technical assistance, feel free to text me or email me during this webinar and I'll try to help you out. I provided the information in the chat box. Next slide, Casey. So just a couple of brief notes about the logistics for today's webinar. There are two options to join. The main option and the one that we suggest is by using your computer's audio, either by a headset or through a speaker. That also will allow you to view our webinar slides today and participate through the chat box. And you can do that by clicking on the link that was provided to you in the registration email from GoToWebinar. You can also call in and participate only through your phone today if you prefer that option, and you can do that by using the telephone number that was either provided here in the GoToWebinar platform in the registration box or in the email that you received with GoToWebinar. Note that if you are only calling in, you obviously won't be able to see our slides. However, our slides and all our workshop materials will be provided after the meeting on the SERPA GSA website, so you can go back and reference them later. Next slide. So during the webinar, we have muted all our participants' microphones to help cut down on background noise. So we have, in order to ask questions, we're going to ask you to please type it out in the questions box in the GoToWebinar platform. You can do this by going into the box that opened up if you're on your computer, and you'll see a tab that says questions. That's in kind of a light gray color. And if you're looking at our slides, it's shown on the slide deck as well. There's going to be a light gray box that has a Q next to it. Please type in your question during the meeting if you have it. And during the question periods, I will read your question out loud. And then I'll also give you the option whether you want to read your question directly to our panelists here. So you can also let me know in the question box whether you would like to read your question out loud. And when the time your question comes up, I will unmute your mic just for that period. If you're participating only via conference call, you will have to send me your question via text because you won't have the same box option. And you can do that anytime by texting me on my personal cell at 818-730-9561. Once again, it's 818-730-9561. I'll be monitoring both the question box and my phone throughout the meeting, so if I look distracted, that's why. But I want to make sure I get everybody's questions. I'll also be writing them down. And we'll be answering questions in the order that we received. The way our webinar is structured today is that we're going to have a series of presentations that are going to be about 5 to 10 minutes in length. And after each presentation, we're going to have a time for you to ask questions on that specific presentation. We'll also have time at the end to answer any other questions that you may have thought of during our meeting today. We know we'll have plenty of time to answer everyone's questions, but if we do run out of time for any reason, we'll make sure to follow up with you after our webinar. Next slide, Casey. A final note that our webinar today is being recorded. So if you have a question, it is going to be entered into the record. And a recording of the webinar and copies of all the materials, like I noted, will be uploaded on the STRGBA website after the meeting. If you're having technical issues along with texting me, you can also let me know in that same question box, and I'll try to help you in the order that I receive those requests. Next slide. And then a final note is that we do have one handout that's accompanying our presentation today. That handout can be downloaded in the same question box, or sorry, in the same box that you're using for GoToWebinar under the heading that says handouts. It should be a PDF that you can download, and you can either look at it as you're viewing the presentation slides today or after the presentation. Before I move on, are there any questions about any of the logistics for our workshop? Again, if you have any questions, you can send them to me in the questions box. All right. I'm not saying any at this time. I will repeat the questions instructions every time we get to the Q&A period, so don't worry about that. Unless I see anything else come through, I think we're ready to start our presentation.
Hey everybody, this is Walt Ward with Stanislaus County. I would like to say, first of all, I wish we could all be together, and I look forward to that soon. But this is the next best thing to being there, I guess. And I've been asked to give you an overview of Sigma. It's pretty high elevation. A lot of you are probably as familiar with these terms as many of us on the team are, but nevertheless, I don't think the repetition will hurt. So like any area of study, you know, Sigma and all this legislation comes with its own terminology and acronyms, and we often forget when we're in public tossing these things out as if, you know, everybody knows. So not to leave anybody behind, certainly Sigma is the subject matter, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014. So when we talk about Sigma, that's what we're talking about. But more importantly, we're talking about the authorities that Sigma gives to local groundwater sustainability agencies, otherwise known as GSAs. And you'll hear a lot more about that. But the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, the local groundwater management entity under Sigma, really is the cornerstone of making Sigma work. So GSAs under Sigma are giving pretty broad authority, but specifically they are directed to implement or to develop and implement groundwater sustainability plans, otherwise known as GSPs. So overarching everything is Sigma. Sigma allows the creation of GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, and those GSAs are giving authority to develop and implement groundwater sustainability plans. So another important acronym you'll hear today is STRGBA, or the STRGBA, which is in fact the Stanislaus and Tuolumne River Groundwater Basin Association, the principal GSA in the Modesto Basin for creating the long-term groundwater sustainability plan. So that's sort of the main terms. Next slide. So just what is SGMA? Well, it's probably the most significant piece of water legislation in California in the last 100 years. By the time it was adopted back in September of 14, California arrived in last place, the 50th state to actually develop a sustainable groundwater management framework for the statewide regulatory framework. So it's been a while coming. And again, as I said, at the root of implementing SGMA is this concept of local control. So Jerry Brown signed it back in September 14. It became effective in January of 15. Here it is 5+ years later, and we're marching down, developing our GSPs up and down the valley. The state at multiple entry points can intervene, and there's always that threat. The initial threat has passed, and I'll show you that in a little bit, and that was the creation of the GSA. But yet we still have the GSP in front of us, multiple entry points for the state. If you fail to prepare one, you missed the deadline, they can intervene. If you do complete your GSP, but they find it inadequate, you can be in non-compliance. Or even if you complete your plan, submit it, and you fail to implement it, or you fail to achieve sustainability, the state can implement or can intervene, and none of that would be good. Next slide. So with any legislation, there's compliance checkpoints, and one I just mentioned, it's now been nearly 3 years ago that the first deadline under SGMA for the creation of the GSAs has come and gone. And everybody, I can say, up and down the state was successful in various different formations of local GSAs. Let's just say for the Modesto Basin, that was accomplished quite handily, actually. The next deadline that the Modesto Basin faces is the preparation of the inaugural GSP. That first Groundwater Sustainability Plan is due about 1.5 years out, January 31, 2022. So that will be the first submittal of the first GSP for this basin. We then launch into a 20-year implementation period over which we, through various actions, work toward achieving and maintaining sustainability. And then along the way, there's annual reporting, and then there's formal 5-year updates. So come January 31, 2022, every 5 years we have updates, and we march our way out to 2042. So what does sustainability mean? If you look at SGMA and you look at the criteria in its simplest form, sustainability means avoiding undesirable results. Well, it doesn't get us very far. What does that mean? Well, undesirable results are focused on 6 different resource areas, and these are listed here. So for each one of these resource areas, we need to, first of all, describe the current condition, the baseline, and we need to do projections, including climate change and all that. But what we really are trying to do is come up with what are called measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. In other words, sustainable management criteria that we, the local agency, gets to define as we see that it best fits our situation in the basin that we live in. And so it kind of falls under the old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. So 6 resource areas. How can we manage what's the current condition? What's the projected condition? How do we come up with the metrics for measuring our performance? And then frankly, once we do have the plan put together, in and of itself, the plan doesn't achieve anything unless, of course, it's implemented. And that means establishing over time policies, programs, projects, management actions, et cetera, that address each and every one of these issues on an annual basis through annual reporting, on 5-year updates, and all the way to and through the compliance period of 2042. Next slide. Any questions?
Thank you, Walt. So again, this is Kirsten Pringle with Stantec. I just want to remind everyone you can send in questions anytime. I didn't receive any during Walt's presentation, but I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to type in any if they have them. Just to remind you, the best way to provide questions is through the questions box in the GoToWebinar platform. However, if you're participating only on conference call, so you don't have the webinar option, you can also text them to me at 818-730-9561, and I'll be able to read them into the record for you. So I'm just going to give 1 or 2 minutes just to see if anyone has questions before we move on to our next presenter.
I don't see anything, Kirsten.
Yeah, I haven't received any, so let's move on with our next presenter. And if people have questions about Walt's section or the overview of Sigma, you can always ask it at the end, and we can answer it at that time too. Thank you.
Great.
So perfect, thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know me already, my name is Eric Thorburn. I'm the Water Operations Manager and District Engineer for Oakdale Irrigation District, one of the 7 member agencies that are part of STRGBA GSA. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Sigma is being implemented thus far in the Modesto Subbasin. So STRGBA, or STRGBA, was formed in 1994 originally in an effort to provide coordinated planning and groundwater management activities within the Modesto Subbasin. Then in response to Sigma, the STRGBA GSA was formed prior to the June 2017 deadline. And in doing so, the STRGBA GSA, has assumed the responsibility and the authority to manage a majority of the Modesto Subbasin. However, there is a small area within the subbasin that's located within the Tuolumne County and is being managed by the Tuolumne County GSA. Together with the Tuolumne County GSA, we are working towards developing a single GSP to cover the entirety of the subbasin. So there are 7 member agencies within the STRGBA GSA, and those include the cities of Modesto, Oakdale, Riverbank, and Waterford, and 2 irrigation districts, those being Modesto Irrigation District and Oakdale Irrigation District, and then finally there's also Stanislaus County. As I mentioned previously, a small part of the Modesto Subbasin lies within Tuolumne County. You can see that gray area on the just into the Tuolumne County area, hatched gray there. That portion of the Modesto Subbasin is managed by the Tuolumne County GSA. The STRGBA GSA continues to coordinate all public outreach and GSP activities with them. So while there technically are 2 independent GSAs in the Modesto Subbasin, we are working cooperatively, as I said, together to have one single GSP or plan to cover the entire subbasin. For more information, if you want to have more information about the Tuolumne County GSA, feel free to contact Kim McFarland directly. Her email is there at the bottom of the slide. So So this is a map of the Modesto Subbasin boundaries with the footprints of the 7 member agencies delineated. The subbasin extends to the east, near and in some areas slightly across the Stanislaus and Tuolumne County lines. Again, those small areas in gray are part of the Tuolumne County GSA. It's bounded on the north by the Stanislaus River, on the south by the Tuolumne River, and on the west by the San Joaquin River. So the city, I'll just go through the colors and what they represent in the service areas. The city of Oakdale is there near the top in the orange. That's the city of Oakdale city limits. The city of Riverbank is just to the west in red. Below that is the city of Modesto in the magenta. And then to the east, near the southern border of the basin, is Waterford, kind of in a neon green. Oakdale Irrigation District service area is delineated there in a cyan color. And then Modesto Irrigation District is south and west of that, surrounding the city of Modesto in that light green. Everything outside of the irrigation district boundaries and the city boundaries is in tan, and that area is represented by solely the county of Stanislaus. Of note, we're also coordinating, back just real quick. Of note, we're also coordinating with the adjacent subbasins to the north, to the south, and to the west, as required by SGMA to ensure consistency in groundwater data. The next slide. So one might ask themselves, why is groundwater important to me, and how could groundwater management and compliance with SGMA impact me personally? Well, it's important to realize, first of all, that the sole source of water for 3 out of the 4 cities in the Modesto Subbasin is groundwater. Those cities being City of Oakdale, the City of Riverbank, and the City of Waterford. And even the 4th, the City of Modesto, gets 60% of its water supply from groundwater. In addition, MID and OID use groundwater conjunctively with their surface water supplies to support farms and dairies that grow food and help to maintain the long-term vitality of our region's agricultural economy. Groundwater truly is a vital resource for all of us to ensure the health, safety, and economic prosperity of our community. With that, thank you for your time, and I'll do my best to answer any questions.
Great. I didn't receive any questions. Just a reminder again, everyone, if you have questions, you can put them in the question box, or you can text me if you're only on your phone at 818-730-9561. Not seeing any questions come up, so if any happen for your section, Eric, we can read them out at the end. Let's move on to our next presenter.
Thank you, Kirsten. Hello, everyone. I'm Phyllis Stannon. I'm a hydrogeologist with Todd Groundwater, and our firm is leading the technical consulting team preparing the GSP for the Modesto Subbasin. Our firm has worked on multiple such GSPs throughout the entire Central Valley, including those that have already been submitted for the critically overdrafted basins. And we're also assisting the Turlock Basin to the south on their GSP process to make sure that we're coordinating our efforts. What you see on this slide are some of the requirements from the GSP process, a checklist, if you will, of topics that can be kind of thought of as sections or chapters in your GSP document. They're organized into 3 groupings here. The first 3 sort of represent the physical or the technical and scientific components of the GSP process, including a description of the Modesto Subbasin Plan area and the groundwater conditions associated with it, along with water budgets, which compare supply and demand from some of the management of surface water and groundwater activities. And once those 3 technical components have been well understood, then the subbasin GSAs will select sustainability goals based on the information that we derive from our scientific assessments. They can help determine the undesirable results for the subbasin and measurable objectives. And then using these as targets for sustainable management within the Modesto Subbasin, that allows you to select appropriate projects and management actions in order to actually achieve sustainability. And then finally, develop a monitoring plan, including protocols and data management to make sure that the basin is continuing to be managed sustainably into the future. These topics can be thought of as a sort of multi-step process that is a continuum in time, beginning again with those technical topics that we talked about, which are shown there in green. Steps 1 through 4 involve the gathering of the hydrogeologic data, a description of the basin setting, and based on that information, the development of a computer model to allow us to better understand the surface water and groundwater connectivity and those systems within the subbasin. We finished those first 3 steps as shown there, highlighted in yellow, and are now working on step 4 to prepare water budgets using that calibrated model that we developed in step 3 and looking at historical, current, and future conditions. Those water budgets will be the real framework and foundation for better understanding how to move forward with sustainability in the basin, and the GSAs can use that information to develop their goals and criteria, shown there as step 5 in that blue. The blue steps 5, 6, and 7 really encompass more of the policy decisions that are being made by the GSAs in the subbasin, including developing management scenarios to achieve those goals and criteria that were defined. And then again, doing a monitoring network to be able to better understand how the groundwater basin is responding to those management actions. So steps 1 through 7 are put together in a plan form and submitted as the Groundwater Sustainability Plan to Department of Water Resources. And as Walt mentioned previously, that's due now by January 31st of 2022. But at that point, we really aren't done because we have the implementation of the plan to accomplish. So those scenarios that we've identified in the plan will begin to be implemented across the basin, along with monitoring that, and then adapting management to any of the ongoing conditions that we see in the groundwater basin as we're monitoring it. And then that might lead to the need to gather more data and better understand the process, and that takes us through the planning process again. So it just shows that there really is a continuum of making sure that the Modesto Subbasin is sustainably managed now and into the future. And I think when you see these kinds of multi-step processes, you begin to think that things are moving so slowly. But if you'll see on the next couple of slides, there's really been a lot that's been accomplished so far. Walt mentioned by the deadline in 2017, the 2 GSAs formed themselves. STRGBA formed itself into a groundwater sustainability agency. Tuolumne County did the same for its portions of the subbasin, and they've been coordinated quite closely to develop one GSP for this subbasin. Luckily, the subbasin has been the recipient of significant financial resources from the state, including $1 million grant in order to prepare this GSP and put this information together. There's also been an additional $1 million awarded to the subbasin to install 18 additional groundwater monitoring wells to really support that GSP monitoring network. I think I've talked a lot about the initiation of this GSP process and how far we are in the development of it. And the GSAs are monitoring this project very closely. They have formed ad hoc committees to provide oversight and technical input into the process and meet monthly to look at the progress that we're making on the GSP. There's also been an additional $85,000 or so brought into the subbasin from the state to support facilitation services, including the type of outreach materials that you've been provided, and including meetings just like this. To facilitate communication, the STRGBA GSAs have put together a website where they post SGMA information, and the URL for that website is shown there. They've also initiated a very aggressive social media campaign and developed newsletters. You can go to the website and sign up for the newsletter, and I hope you'll do that. We're providing some very informative information, and I hope it will be helpful and help everyone better understand the process. And then finally, we've actually come to you and asked you what's important to you. The stakeholder survey process that Stantec has conducted has been a very helpful and informative outreach tool for us to better understand what groundwater users in this basin need and understand. And to describe a little bit more about that process, I'm going to turn it back over to Kirsten and ask her to go through the stakeholder survey information for you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Phyllis. Hey everyone, this is Kirsten Pringle with Stantec. As Phyllis mentioned, the Sturgba GSA put out an online stakeholder survey almost a year ago to better understand how much people understood about SGMA, what people's priorities were for the GSP planning process, to get a better sense of what are the best ways to conduct outreach in the subbasin so we can better engage stakeholders like yourselves. We got over 150 participants to the survey, and because a lot of people took the time to do it, I just want to briefly provide an overview of the survey results and explain how the results are being used. I also want to note the survey is still available on the Sturgba GSA website if you'd like to go take it if you haven't already, and we provided the survey link here for your viewing. So just some of the high-level results of the stakeholder survey. One, we learned that participants overall understood a little bit about SGMA, but not a lot. And we learned that agricultural water users were more informed about SGMA than, say, municipal water users or water users in urban areas. So what this told us is we needed to do more background education to members of the general public to get you to understand what SGMA is and why this is important. And our first step to doing this is actually this workshop. So as you can see that we took some time to provide you some background of what SGMA is. And that information is also provided in the handout that we attached here and we'll have on the website. So we're trying to build this kind of baseline knowledge about what SGMA is to better allow our stakeholders and members of the public to participate in the process as we go forward. We also learned that there are a number of already trusted communication channels in the community. And so rather than having you have to always sign up for things or come to our meetings, we're going to also try to partner with some local agencies to send information out through places you may already be getting your information, such as the local farm bureaus, local civic organizations. We also learned that a lot of people get their information about their water from their local water district or irrigation district. So this may be through your local district's water quality report, through regular newsletters they're going, or through their meetings. So we're also going to try to send out information about SGMA through these channels that you're already getting your information from. Next slide, Casey. We learned that one of the top concerns that people are concerned about their water is the State Water Board's Bay Delta Plan. This really came through clearly in the survey. We also learned people have concerns about their groundwater, including groundwater contamination and the lack of groundwater recharge projects in the subbasin, both of which are topics that the GSP is going to address, and why it's so important that you stay involved in this process in the different steps to provide your input on both projects and how to address some of these groundwater contamination issues. We also learned that people really prioritize water use in the area for health and human safety, but water for agriculture, for supporting our economy, and for the environment are also very important to people in the subbasin as well. And we'll make sure that the groundwater in the region is sustainable long-term to maintain these important things. And finally, we learned that people wanted the GSAs to consider building more groundwater recharge and surface water storage projects. So as Phyllis mentioned, a really important part of the GSP development process is identifying projects and management actions to sustainably manage the groundwater resources for the next 50 years. And so we'll be asking at a certain time for you to provide inputs on what projects and specific actions the subbasin should consider. And that's a great time to provide your input at that time if you have recommendations you want the GSAs to consider. Next slide. As a follow-up to the stakeholder survey, we actually conducted a series of focus groups with stakeholders that were identified by some of the GSA representatives. We conducted 5 focus groups with 15 participants in total. And we also asked we will be presenting the results of the focus groups as well as the stakeholder survey at a presentation we'll be making to the Sturgba GSA. And we really encourage everyone to attend if you're more interested in hearing the results of that survey. and/or the results of those focus groups, and hearing more about how we'll be incorporating those results into our communications and planning actions moving forward. So that presentation is going to be held on June 10th from 1:30 at 3 p.m. Typically, the STRGBA GSA meetings, which are always open to the public, are held at the MID's office in downtown Modesto. However, you might want to check back on the website due to changing health conditions with the COVID-19 situation. That meeting may be held virtually, like our workshop now. Next slide. All right. We did get a couple of questions. I'm going to read them out loud. Phyllis, I believe these ones are for you, and if anyone else wants to jump in and add to Phyllis's response, please do so. The first one is from Luis Uribe. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Luis asks, what information do you use to prepare for the water budget?
Thank you very much. The water budgets are a simple accounting of inflows and outflows that go into the groundwater basin. You can think about it as your checkbook. When you write a check, that's an outflow, and when you make a deposit, that's an inflow. And so this accounting is done through a series of analyses using surface water delivery, using soil properties, the physical conditions within the groundwater basin. We have information on wells, we have information on land use and potential water use associated with that land use. You can imagine that we're putting together a variety of details and information all across the physical conditions of the subbasin in order to identify these inflows and outflows. And then we look at the inflows and outflows. We look at them both on a tabular basis. We look at them as they are reflected in the groundwater system with respect to changes in water levels. And then we also look at them through simulations using our computer model, which gives us a real mass balance analysis of what's going on in the groundwater system. So that's a little bit of the process, and they're very important analyses for the entire subbasin. So appreciate your interest and question about them.
Great. And Luis, if you have an additional follow-up for Phyllis, you can type it to me in the question box and I'll read it out loud. Our next question is from Tony Ott. Tony asks, will additional storage be allowed by the state to meet our sustainability goals?
Certainly the state encourages storage projects, either groundwater storage or surface water storage. It isn't clear to me exactly what's going to be needed or required for sustainable management in the Modesto Subbasin. But as Kirsten mentioned earlier, if we have input from stakeholders about specific projects, that would be a great opportunity for the stakeholders to participate in this process. Certainly, the groundwater storage projects are always a priority because this basin is lucky enough to have a surface water supply in addition to its groundwater supply. And those two supplies for decades in this subbasin have been used conjunctively, using groundwater and surface water resources together. Provides a lot of management actions and opportunities that this subbasin may well expand and optimize going forward in its plan.
Great, thanks, Phyllis. And again, with Tony, if you have a follow-up question for Phyllis, you can type it in the question box. Sorry, does someone else have a follow-on response? All right.
Walt, I just wanted to add something to that question and response, and that is, if our plan identifies storage projects as being the management actions or the projects that we recognize and identify as those that get us to and maintaining sustainability, we're going to put them in our plan. And I mean, to me, if we're going to demonstrate local control, then let's demonstrate local control. Now, that might mean we need to take the next step, and that is to not only identify these projects, but also be prepared to fund and maintain and operate. But I don't think we need to shy away. If we identify projects, whether they're groundwater or surface water storage, we should be identifying them as elements of our plan.
Thanks, Walt and Phyllis. We have a question from phone from John Brichetto. John asks, who is creating this groundwater overdraft problem? The irrigation districts actually help the underground water, are not contributors to the groundwater, correct?
Well, it's a complicated question, and I think the best thing we can do is to finish up our water budgets before we start suggesting that this subbasin is an overdraft. There's been no suggestion of that so far, and we're moving everything forward with respect to doing the modeling now. From a technical perspective, one of the things that we worry most about is making sure that the model is an accurate tool for planning purposes. We recognize that we're not going to get all of the details of the water budget exactly perfect for this plan, but we want to be able to have it accurate enough to give us some projections going forward so that we can better understand what sustainability means in the subbasin and how best to manage that. So we certainly are not going into this with preconceived notions about what happens with water budgets. Rather, we're taking a very systematic and comprehensive approach for that process. Stay tuned.
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis. We have a question from Peter Druckmeyer. Peter asks, what do we know about the interconnectivity of groundwater and the Tuolumne River?
Well, we can learn a lot from looking at the groundwater conditions around the river. We have wells that have been drilled and monitored for decades in most areas around the river that give us an understanding of what groundwater levels are. We also know the channel elevations beneath the river. So that gives us a good understanding of the time periods in which groundwater might actually be contributing to the river, and time periods when the river is actually contributing to groundwater. It's an interactive process. Both processes occur. They occur at different reaches of the river, and they occur at different time periods. Sometimes when the river is wet and running, the water system may not be contributing very much to the channel. In other times, groundwater levels are high. There's the opportunity for groundwater to contribute to base flow. So it's quite a complicated process, and there's not a yes or no answer to it. And again, I hate to put you off on this, but we are in the throes of looking at the details of the water budgets right now. We're trying to better understand our modeling results around the river and when groundwater is contributing to the river and when the river is contributing to groundwater and under what conditions. And that will all be documented as part of the plan.
Thanks, Phyllis. I just want to add, if anyone's interested in that work, you can always attend a Sturgis GSA meeting, which we'll talk about in a minute, how and when those meetings take place. Or you can come to our next public workshop, which will be more focused on water budgets. So our next question is from Stacy Henderson. Stacy asks, have all the monitoring wells been installed using the grant funding received to date? If not, will the model and water budgets be updated after they are installed?
That's a great question. So many things in this process are interactive and so many pieces are moving together forward at the same time. So the short answer, Stacy, is that no, none of the 18 wells have been installed yet. We just got the grant agreement this month. So we are moving forward as fast as we can to get those wells installed. And one of the great things about already having the model together is that the model is helping to inform us to identify areas where we can best locate these new monitoring wells. It's such an interactive process, and one of the things that you find out, you can look at a map and you can say, oh, there's a lot of wells there, you already know a lot, and the answer is absolutely we do. But when the questions become more local and specific, then the data that you need to answer the questions need to be local and specific as well. So we're moving forward with citing those 18 wells now. We already had some indication of where we needed information, but the modeling has really taught us the areas that we really need to focus a little bit more attention on. So we're doing that now. And the answer is yes, of course, we can update the model over time. one of the things that I think we all need to recognize is that this model is a planning tool. It's not the end all be all. It's not the answer. It's not the fully most accurate representation of the physical system, although we're working hard to make it that way. But one information from these 18 monitoring wells, we can absolutely look at how they modify and better inform our understanding of the groundwater conditions. That's why I loved the slide that we have that was the little bit of a circle. It's such an interactive process. We always, we need to move forward with this plan, and we will move forward with what we understand as of right now. And then as we monitor and as we begin to put management actions in place, we will always learn more from it. And if we have a good monitoring program in place, we can always do better and better job for sustainable management in the future.
Great, thanks, Phyllis. I have one more question. This is from Alexis Stevens. Alexis asks, if storage projects are identified as necessary, who will pay for them? How will that be decided or determined?
Which projects are selected for the plan and how they are funded has yet to be determined. GSAs have been incredibly successful at looking for and applying for success, putting in successful applications for grants. As we all have talked about, there's almost $3 million worth of money for support of this planning process in and of itself. We don't have a crystal ball as to how much money the state is going to be able to allocate for the future, but we do have Prop 1 money for GSP implementation. So we do think there will be some grant funding available. Additional funding would need to come from the local GSAs, and there are a variety of funding mechanisms under SGMA that might be implemented. All of that certainly will be considered, but it's a little too early to say exactly how things are going to go right now. We haven't even gotten to the point of understanding what management actions are going to be needed in the subbasin to remain sustainable.
Great, thank you, Phyllis. I haven't received any other questions, so I think we'll move on to our next presenter. If anyone had a question and they weren't able to ask it yet, we'll have another Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There's been some really good discussion thus far, and hopefully this is just the beginning and not the end as we move forward over the course of the next 18 months. We are nearing the end of the meeting, so thank you for making it this far. I'll start to wrap things up by letting you know where we're going from here, how you can get involved, and then as Kirsten mentioned, we'll open it up for a final Q&A. Phyllis talked about this in much more detail than I'm going to, but our next steps, as Phyllis mentioned, will be to calculate the historic, the current, and the projected water budgets for the subbasin, and then move into developing the sustainability goals and criteria, identification of the management scenarios, and then identification of the monitoring network. As you might expect, we will be seeking public comment along the way. Actually, our next workshop will focus on water budgets and sustainability goals and criteria, and that's currently planned for August of this year. Next slide, please. To be kept informed about development of the GSP, we encourage you to sign up for the STRGBA GSA mailing list, which is on our website. In addition to attending the public meetings, you of course can provide public input on the GSP process at any of our regular meetings. And then you can also directly provide comments on the GSP chapters using the comment form, again, located on our website. And then finally, to help spread the word about this important planning effort, we would encourage you to talk to your friends, families, and neighbors that reside within the basin. Next slide, please. Kirsten mentioned this previously, but our monthly meetings are normally held on the second Wednesday of every month from 1:30 to 3 p.m. at the Modesto Irrigation District office or online, given the unique circumstances that we currently find ourselves in. Next slide, please. On this slide, you will see the contact information for each of the different representatives from each of the GSA member agencies, as well as the contact information for the Tuolumne County GSA representative. And of course, as with many of the items we've discussed today, this too is located on our website. Next slide, please. So lastly, for more information, you can visit our website, contact your local GSA representative, or follow us on social media, and both our Facebook and Twitter feeds are noted there. So with that, I'll pass it back to Kirsten for any final questions and answers that we may have. Great,
thank you. We have one question, and just remind people that if you're participating only on your phone, you can text me at 818-730-9561. We did have one more question for Mr. Bichetto. He asked, will the districts get credits for actually adding water to the underground?
So, John, I can go ahead and take that question. I think, you know, as Phyllis and some of the others have alluded to, we're working through the modeling now and really just trying to understand not only how things work within the basin, but also along our boundary conditions. So the East San Joaquin Basin to the north, the Delta Mendota on the west, and then of course the Tuolumne on the south. Similar to the answer that Phyllis provided with respect to funding, I think your question gets at a component of that, and whether or not there will be, or how the establishment of fees will be established throughout the basin. And from my perspective, that your comments question sort of gets at the heart of what benefits do the irrigation districts and ultimately our constituents provide to the underground aquifer. So save that question for a future discussion. It doesn't fall on deaf ears, and as we move forward over the course of the next 18 months, that's what we're going to be talking about in more detail.
Great. I don't see any other questions. I think we can wrap up, but we will stay on the line. I'll ask my panelists to stay on the line 5-10 minutes after we end, just in case anyone has any last minute things. Before I let John give closing remarks, I just want to remind everyone that as we've mentioned, the materials will be posted on the website in about a week or so. You'll also receive a follow-up email in about a week with a direct link to where all those materials are. In addition to this recording, the presentation slides and the handout, we'll also have Spanish versions of the presentation slides and handout. So if you know someone that's bilingual or only speaks Spanish that you think could benefit from this information, feel free to send them those materials or send them our way. If you have any feedback about the format of today's workshop, you can always email it to me, Kirsten Pringle @stantec.com. My email is provided in the chat handout. I always like feedback at how we can make our presentations more helpful for you and get feedback easier for you. So I'm happy to hear from you all the time. And then as John noticed, if you want to participate in future workshops and be kept informed on when those are, please sign up for our interested parties database by emailing your local GSA representative, and that will make sure you get notices of all future workshops and public outreach activities. And with that, I'll send it back to John.
Yes, thank you all for your participation today. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to your continued participation as we move towards January of 2022, submission of our GSP, and then of course, as we've all talked about today, that's just really the beginning, and we're going to continue to stay engaged such that we can manage groundwater sustainably into the future. So Walt mentioned just briefly, and I'd like to end on this, that SGMA really empowered the locals. I've told our board before that that's true. SGMA did give us the power to solve local problems with local resources. That's what this group intends to do. And again, we look forward to your participation moving forward. So thank you for your time and have a good rest of your day.